I got my first Fender in '75, right? Before that, I had a Univox bass. That was my first bass, and it looked like B.B. King's guitar.
One of the
You know what I mean? Like it looked like a 335.
Yeah.
So I had that, and I was just happy to have any bass. You know what I mean? Because I begged my mom and dad for one. Got a jazz bass, Sunburst in '75. Probably in '77, early '77. I was loading my car and put the amp in the trunk. That's a good one more thing. I must be tripping. I got in the car and drove off and left the bass against the side of the other side of the car. Yeah. And the battery disappeared. Mom took me to 48th Street in New York. That's where we got your instruments from. It was just one street, one block where all the music stuff. So she got me another one, man. Left that one in the car about 6 months later and got that one installed in New York City. Right? And so I figured, well, that's the end of my bass playing career. And Mom, she didn't tell my dad about the next one. She took me again and got me one. That's 1977. That's the one that I have. I held on to that sucker.
So maybe it was actually sort of like, maybe
Yeah, so I figured it was meant to be, you know what I mean? But that was the bass that I used, man, for everything.
Okay, 3 quick things. Firstly, if you think Marcus Miller is an absolute boss, give this video a quick like now. Second thing is, if you want more content like this, if you enjoy this format, please let us know who you would like to see on the channel down in the comments below. And third is, obviously, if you're new to the channel, subscribe right now so you get notified when we release new videos like this. And we have actually created some fantastic free courses for bass players just like you, to help you get your fretboard knowledge together, to help you get your technique together, to help you get your music theory together. And it's much deeper, thorough, more in-depth content that you will find here on YouTube. So make sure that you hit the link in the description down below to grab one of those free courses of your choice, or just go to the URL here on the screen. Now, back to the interview.
There was a big difference between LA studio musicians and New York studio musicians. To people who live not in the States, it's just American, but there was a big difference. And the LA musicians, they had cars, they had cartage guys, you know what I mean, who would carry. So, my man Nathan East, when he would go to a session, he had 5 basses, listen to the song, figure out which one to play. But in New York, man, it's the city, you can't drive around the city like when you're going from session to session. So you had to carry your gear on your back. So you would get a bass that was as versatile as you could get, you know what I mean? So we all played Fender, either precision or jazz bass. Will Lee, Neil Jason, Francisco Santeno, Anthony Jackson. These were the New York studio bass players. Yeah. And we all played Fender, because that was the one that you could get enough variety in the sound and it still sounded classic.
They could be got the front, they could be
well for the jazz, And then with the precision, it just sounded right. It always sat in the track very well. Yeah. You bring another bass engineer, that sounds great. Do you have a Fender?
Is that what it was like? People just like the engineers wanted that sound on the record.
Because they knew that it sat right between the bass drum and the piano in a really nice way. You know what I mean? So my jazz bass was cool. I could go do fusion gigs at night using my back pickup. Yeah. And I could do funk gigs, just by changing pickup or where I pluck the string. So I was a really versatile bass. In terms of having my sound, I tell you, man, I played fretless bass exclusively, like almost exclusively from 18, 19 years old.
Really?
Yeah, if I had a session where I needed to play a fretted bass, it was no problem. But in terms of stuff that I was doing, experimenting with and practicing on, it was all fretless. I still play on the frets. I'm like a fretless guy would do. And but I'll tell you, I was a real fan of a few bass players. There was, of course, James Jamerson. I didn't know it was James Jamerson at the time because Motown didn't list the names of the musicians, right? So I thought it was this guy, Jermaine Jackson. You know what I mean? Because he's the bass player in the band. Yeah. So I figured that was him on the records. Very inspiring. He was only 14. I was 12, something like that. So I was like, I got to get it together because this dude is bad, And I later on realized that was James Jamerson. And everybody played bass like that at the time, early 70s. It was thick, stats. It was Motown. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's just what bass sounded like. And that's what bass had sounded like for 15, 20 years.
Yeah, because it's actually quite a young instrument if you think about it, isn't it?
Mid-50s.
Yeah, exactly.
So But then, we heard Larry Graham, and he's like, he blew everybody's mind. First of all, he said, "What is that? What is that sound? Is that a guitar or some deep tuning, or what is it?"
Can you remember where you were the first time you heard like that?
Yeah, it was Whoa, what is that? What is that?
Yeah.
What is that, man? What is that? And we were at a talent show, because that was the thing you did back in New York. I'm from the area called Jamaica, Queens.
Yeah.
They used to have talent shows, and all the young bands would play, and we had for like 20 minutes. And a bass player in one of the bands was playing a song with like, and my boys were like, "Can you do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I can do that." I went home, man. I was like, "Okay, how does that work?" And I didn't leave my room until I could at least get a basic sound.
How old were you then?
13, 14, But it was just so, like, especially for a young ear, you know what I mean? It was not subtle. It was like, it was cool. So we all got into that. And then we heard Stanley, at least I heard Stanley Clark, right? Who had all these jazz chops, but he still was incorporating the stuff that was now available to a bass guitar. You know what I mean? And that blew my mind, and I spent a lot of time playing like him. A lot of time. Like, I would learn his solos note for note. And if I'm on a little gig and it's time for a bass solo, I would play that solo. Regardless of the key, I switch it back to E and play my Stanley Clark solo and then go back to B flat, whatever key we were in, And then somebody said, "You're a bass player, man, you need to listen to this guy, Jaco Pastor." So I bought the record, man, and okay. The first song you heard was Donna Lee, right? Which is a bebop tune, but it didn't have any piano, it was just Jaco and the percussionist Donna Lee. So I didn't have any reference. I couldn't hear what key it was. And I said, this dude's just playing any random notes he wants to, right? Then enrolled in the jazz class in high school. And here we are playing Donna Lee. I said, this doesn't sound like anything like what Jaco playing. What is he doing? Went home, got to the piano and played the chord changes to Donna Lee. And heard actually what he was doing against those chord changes. And that was, okay, I'm 100%. I was traveling 2.5 hours to Staten Island from Queens to do bebop gigs. I said I could always learn the solos, but I never knew why they were playing the notes they were playing, right? So I was just like, somebody said, you need to learn jazz. These guys come from a jazz background, and then they went funky and they incorporated to create the fusion that I was loving.
Something I really wanted to ask you actually is like your career. There's like two paths to it. Like there's other paths like there's sort of like film stuff that you've done and obviously you arrange and stuff like that. But if I look at it, sort of like there's a lot of really like monstrously awesome pop stuff that you've done. Like Luther jumps to mind for me, and all of that stuff. But then there's also like this jazz thing. It's always been throughout all of your career as well. Like obviously you started playing with Miles in, was it 81 when you were like 20 or 21 years old? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then even when you look at your band now, like it's heavy jazz players, So for you, when did you start getting into jazz as a kid?
I'm in high school, and there's two incredible drummers in my class. It was the art school in New York City, the LaGuardia School, and there was Omar Hakim over here, and there was Kenny Washington over here. And these two were the greatest drummers I've ever heard. And if you hear Omar today, that's exactly what he sounded like in high school, at least to my ears. I was 13, 14, but he was incredible. Kenny was incredible. Omar was super contemporary. Kenny, he was 14, but he talked like he was 55. He talked like an old jazz guy. You guys ain't swinging, you know what I mean? And so I would hang out with Omar, we got the band together, but I'd also hang out with Kenny. And Kenny said, you need to learn jazz. And I said, why? I said, because all the best musicians play jazz. That's how teenagers talk, you know what I mean? All the best musicians play jazz. And that was enough reason for me. So what do I have to do? He said, come to my house. Where do you live? In Staten Island. Staten Island? That's a half hour on the bus, an hour on the train, an hour on the ferry, and then a half hour on the bus to get to Staten Island.
Yeah.
But every weekend, man, I would make the trek out to Kenny's house, and he had 3,000 LPs that his father had started the collection. And he started me, man. He played Louis Armstrong, and he played me every version of jazz up until what was happening in 1974. chicory and return for took me through the whole path. I would go every weekend.
I mean, you're listening, obviously you're listening, were you playing that stuff? Were you trying to learn it?
His dad had a jazz workshop, so I was starting to play, you know what I mean?
Oh,
and, you know, I had the voice going in the middle of the jazz songs, you know what I mean? But I started really learning the language, man, and I'll tell you, it opened me up. First of all, you gotta know harmony. You know, you can't get away with not knowing harmony. I told Kenny, hey man, my dad's cousin played jazz. He played some big people. Kenny said, who's your cousin? I said, Wynton Kelly.
Yeah.
I said, is he good? I didn't know. He starts pulling LPs. Miles Davis was from Montgomery, you know what I mean? So I realized I already have a connection to this music, you know? And I started learning it, and so like you said, I was on two paths. Omar, you know, I met all these cool guys in Jamaica, Queens, you know, Tom Brown being one of them. I met all these bad cats, so I'm in a contemporary mode there. By the way, these cats like Tom Brown were incredible jazz players too. Yeah. And then I was playing traditional stuff with Kenny Washington. So I always kind of take my story back to those two guys that in high school.
Was there ever a point where you felt pulled in two different directions at once in your younger years where you're like, am I going to go this traditional route or am I going to move more into the contemporary? Or did it just...
It was New York City, man. It was New York City, so I would go do a funk gig over here, and then the next night I'm playing with a jazz trio, you know what I mean? With a guy who played with Charlie Parker, you know what I mean? And then we do fusion gigs with the Brecker Brothers where we combine all of it, you know? So it was very, and then I was playing African bands, Latin bands, reggae bands, you know, Caribbean bands, you know, it's New York City, so I got a very wide start, and nobody ever demanded that you make a choice, you know? If you come from another place, if you come from New Orleans, or you come from the Bay Area, you come from Minneapolis, you know, there's one sound, you know what I mean? New York is not one sound, New York is a mix. So I'm a product of that environment, you know? And it's crazy now, because I started playing the bass at 13. But
is that when you started playing, when you were 13?
Yeah, I was playing clarinet. You know, my dad's a piano player, so I grew up piano and the organ, and he played primarily in church and for weddings, and you know, like a great local musician, working musician did. Yeah. So I was always goofing around on the piano, you know what I mean? But New York City school system offered trumpet, clarinet, and drums, and of course, everyone wanted to play the drums, but my father said, not in this apartment, you know? And I'd already, like, you know, at 8 years old, they offered us this little wooden thing called a recorder, you know what I mean? So my dad said, well, you already played the recorder.
That's what I played.
Yeah. He said, you already played the recorder, why don't you just stay with the wind instrument and play the clarinet? And I already love music, so I figured I'm not into the clarinet that much, but it's music, so I got into it, and that's the instrument that I stayed with all the way through college, you know, in school. But, you know, I heard the Jackson 5, you know, and I got deep into soul music. Clarinet wasn't really appropriate for that style, you know, moved over to saxophone for a while. But man, I heard that bass, man. A friend of mine got a bass for Christmas who lived in the same building as I did. His name was Brian Harris, and Brian and I were best friends. And I'm sure Brian's mom got sick of me being over there because I was just playing his bass, man. I heard that sound, and it was the sound that was at the center of music at that time. You listen to an old Motown record or Stax record, Isaac Hayes, or any of those records, the drums are just, sound like a drum set like this. It's just another instrument, you know. It wasn't like the bass drum like you get today, like in EDM. It's just a knock, you know. And the real soul of the track, the bottom of the track, was the bass guitar, you know. And so I was like, man, this is right in the center, man. I would love to do this. And like I said, I've already been a fan of the music. Convinced my mom to get me that Univox bass that looked like B.B. King's guitar, you know, and I was on my way. So that's how I got into it, you know, and so I had two parallel paths. I played the clarinet classical. I auditioned for high school with Mozart's clarinet concerto.
Really? You did that like full classical, yeah?
Afro, platform shoes, bell bottoms, and clarinet. That was me. And, but in the streets, I'm playing the bass, you know what I mean? And so when I became 17, 18, producers in New York were looking for bass players who could read but didn't sound like they would read. You know?
And you'd obviously got, because you come from the reading background, because of the clarinet.
Right, but I'm also from the hood, you know what I mean? So I'm playing like, okay, yeah, I got it. I'm not gonna play that. You know, I'm gonna play something else that works. I understand what you know, the feeling, what you want, you know? And so that was really valuable back then. Willie could read, Anthony Jackson reads incredibly. You know, Bill Jason, Francisco Santana. Most of the New York bass players who were working, they worked because they played a street instrument, but they could read music, and that was really valuable.
Was that an incredibly important thing for you to begin with in your career, reading?
It just made things easier. You know what I mean? Studio time was expensive. Nobody had time to wait for you to figure it out. You know what I mean? No one had time to show you stuff. Certainly no one was sending you a track a week early. You know, so you could practice your little licks that you're going to play. And no, man, we got to go. The arranger just wrote this thing out 15 minutes ago, you know? So you gotta go. So you come in, man, and say, hey, man, we need to be done with this jump in 20 minutes. You know what I mean? You hit it. One more, make a couple of adjustments, do it again. Thank you, gentlemen. And you go to your next one that you have in an hour. You know what I mean? And that became the studio life. I started that around 17, 18 years old, and did it for maybe 20 years. You know.
And exploded on the scene like shortly afterwards, right? Like another track that I want to play everybody is this track. Like for me, maybe the best bass line of all time. For me, I have to say, and I would love to know. Like, I'm sure that this is done on the 77 with the I think that you had the preamp in on this, so let's definitely talk about the sound there, because I'm sure that everybody's seen that bass and like when did that happen, like the story of that, and why did you start using active circuitry? But also I would love to know like about this date when you were in the studio with Luther. The tune is obviously never too much. It's just it's crushing.
I'm like, what song is he talking about?
Oh, dude.
It's a long intro too, man. I was like,
Long intros, exactly.
romantic string and everything.
Just incredible. Like, I've got so many questions about this. So, was that line written out when you got in the studio? This is the line that you are going to play.
Yeah, Nat Adderley Jr. Grew up with Luther. He was Luther's accompanist since they were teenagers, all through Luther's career. He's the nephew of Cannonball Adderley, right?
Yeah.
And Luther had written the song and Nat had arranged it. So when I got in, every note was written out, you know? But it was really, we personalized it with the articulation, you know, like the pop. Way behind me.
That, it's so like I try and play that, I'd be like,
yeah,
you know, like that bit there.
And that's from the jazz, you know what I mean? Because when you're playing
it's got that skip to it, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So when I heard the playback, I go, ooh, that's a little far back. I said, Luther, are you okay? I can move it. Leave it just like that.
You wanted, is that where you heard it? Where you were, oh.
I said, ooh, that's a little too far. You know what I mean? But it had a thing. And Luther said, no, it's got a thing. So leave it. And then, you know, Nat had I was like, that don't make no sense. You know?
Yeah, like it does that. Is it the section? That's the one that you played the first time.
That's the main one, but
and then the second one
is like, yeah. So I was like, I said, I changed to, I went. That made more sense to me. That made more sense. And I said, yeah, no, man, like that F sharp don't mean nothing, man. Like to play the way it is. I said, okay, because they were very. I don't
so you didn't get the F sharp in there?
No, man. No, he said go back to the. I said, I'm going. But you know, the way they did music, Nat and Luther, it was it had a lot of character and stuff that didn't seem like it made sense. when we were recording it, by the time you heard all the strings and everything, it was just like, and I learned not to question. A lot of people think that I wrote that because we did, and I began to write shortly after that. We wrote a lot of music together. But this was just me coming in and doing the ass and just trying to put some punk on it, you know what I mean, with attitude.
Yeah. Dude, there was a lot of attitude there. And can you tell the story about the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You gotta tell the story about it.
Yeah. I don't know, man. You know, when you're 19 years old, you know, you just got energy, you know. So where you supposed to go? 3, 4. And so now it's counting down. 2. I went. And now looking up. But that made it. You know what I mean? That made the record. And it kind of lets everybody know what's getting ready to happen.
It's absolutely killer. Thank you from all of the bass players, you know, in all of the world that have listened to that and just thought, holy crap, this is maybe the best thing I've ever heard in my life.
You know, Ruth and I, you know, I was like his little brother. You know, we started in a Roberta Flack's band. Roberta Flack at the time had the #1 song in the entire world called First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. And we would travel with her. He sang background. I played the bass with Roberta. And we were on the road all the time, you know, and he was making me listen to singers, which I didn't really ever pay attention to. I was, you know, a musician.
Yeah.
But he made me listen to Dionne Warwick, Aretha Franklin, Donny Hathaway, and he sat down with me, played me the music, and broke it down the same way like a jazz piano player would break down harmony to, like, look, here, the flat 9 is just a half step above the 5, blah, 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 blah. Ruth was saying, listen to Dionne, she uses a head voice, and she doesn't use vibrato into the chord chant. Right? Mixed voice.
He was really analytical.
He was a musician whose instrument was the fish, you know what I mean? And if you were to listen to a video of 60 concerts that he'd done in a year, the consistency was incredible.
Because he knew exactly what
Because he knew what he was doing. It wasn't accidental and it wasn't just instinctive. You know, he knew what he was doing. So anyway, once he taught me that stuff, I could hear it. And so when he started doing records, now I never too much, but I began to start producing it. And I could see the control while he's at the mic. And I could say, you might want to try that again, because I know you're not going to like, I know what you're going for. You know, I could be like his mirror on the other side of the glass.
You were working with it like that closely.
I was using the lessons he taught me, you know what I mean, to help him get what he needed faster.
Wow, that's amazing. And on that album, it was the 77 Channel Spectrum.
But it's still passive.
Still passive at this time.
It was that Ampeg B15, you know.
That was an Ampeg B15 passive bass. When did the okay. I've got another one for you. By the way, this is great fun. I love this to play tracks and the guys like that. How fucking cool is this? Okay, next up. Here we go. You'll know this one. We don't want to give it away. Look how happy Dave Sanborn is that he's like, this is the shit. So that is the bass, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
And this is you wrote this track, right?
Yeah. It's supposed to be the first song on my album that I'm intending to make, you know.
It's just such an incredible bass there. And there's this weird thing. So there's two things I want to talk about.
The fun.